Hi, it's Steve Hargadon, and welcome to the Emergency Home Learning Summit. Our guest today is Jeff Cobb. Welcome, Jeff.
Thanks, Steve. Great to be here.
Great to have you here. So, what do you do? In addition to owning the other Learning Revolution domain name, what do you do?
Yeah, it is funny to have the two learning revolutions talking to each other here. I ended up with that site because I work in the world primarily of adult lifelong learning. And I was seeing a lot happening there, sort of in parallel to everything that was happening in the rest of the world of learning and education. And so I wrote a book called Leading the Learning Revolution. That led to a website with the Learning Revolution name. But what I do in my day job is I work mostly with organizations that are in what I describe as the business of lifelong learning, continuing education, professional development. And that tends to be trade and professional associations, along with continuing education divisions, some training firms. But I characterize it as a third sector of education. So after K through 12, after higher education, there's this other 50, 60 years that people have to navigate and continually learn through. And so we help organizations with that. And I also write and speak a lot about that as well. I have a blog called Mission to Learn, where I really focus on what it means to be a truly productive and engaged lifelong learner.
Jeff, did you have a story about school growing up? What were your own school experiences?
I was very fortunate, and I know you've talked with Blake Bowles some during this, and I think he and I were having this discussion when I interviewed him at one point, and I really had just great school experiences. I feel very, very lucky, very privileged. I had teachers who clearly cared very much about the students, and most of the teachers. I mean, there were obviously the occasional ones that weren't so committed, but and I also had a cohort of peers who went through most of school with me. I was in sort of a special program, and so I felt like growing up, I was probably pretty well engaged as a learner. Had people who were supporting me and caring about me. My parents were very supportive of it as well. Went to public schools the whole time. I grew up in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and the public schools that were available, at least then, were good. So I have a positive memory of my early schooling experience.
Were there any particular moments that you went through a transition? Was there a moment when a particular teacher or an adult or a parent really shaped your view of lifelong learning?
Definitely. In fact, I've just coincidentally been thinking about this because I'm about to do some speaking around the topic of engagement, and I was thinking about when was one of those experiences early in my life that, like you said, was really kind of transformative. And there were a number, but one that stands out for me in particular, because it so much shaped where I am and who I am today, was in ninth grade. I had an English teacher, Miss Powers, who was the first person who I think really made literature come alive for me. But then as a result of that, made writing come alive for me. Like I started to get what it meant to be a good writer and how powerful that could be. And for me, how enjoyable that was. And, I went on from there. Earlier in my career, I thought I was actually going to be a literature professor. That sort of fell by the wayside after a while, after spending quite a bit of time in the comparative literature department here at the University of North Carolina. But I've kept writing throughout my life. It's been central to everything that I do. And I really credit her with having opened my eyes to that and made me realize how powerful that is and how much personal potential I had with it.
So one of the tensions or dilemmas in K-12 education is how much of the skills that are learned there help someone become a good worker. And is a good worker being compliant and getting the job done on time with as little mistakes as possible, or is it being creative and innovative? And a lot of times people will say, well, industry wants really creative people, but the system pretty much generates people who know how to follow. Yeah. What's your take on all of that?
Yeah, I think we're at a point in history of kind of tension, of misalignment, because I think we are increasingly at a point where employers are recognizing the need for more self-directed, more creative, more innovative people, and they're much more open to that now. I would say in the mid 1950s, to come in and say you were self-directed and open and motivated, General Motors probably didn't want you, under those conditions, unless you were in a certain position, within that type of company. But companies now are much more open to that. But of course, the school system, which is, as you noted, really grew out of the industrial era and preparing workers to be part of the workforce and to be compliant within a system. And that's not necessarily in alignment with where a lot of business, a lot of what we now need to do simply to make a living in the world. What constitutes making a living at this point has been greatly disrupted for most people, and you have to have a much higher level of agility, I think, than has been the case in the past.
Although it's hard for parents because you say, well, let your child make some choices, have agency, find their own passions, and maybe they'll be a book author, or maybe they'll be a jazz musician. And I can see the grimace on the parents' faces, right? Will that pay the mortgage?
Yeah. Yeah, it's tough. I've got, two kids myself, a 13-year-old and a 9-year-old. And I'm always conscious of the tension. They're in standard schooling, they're doing public schools, we're not doing the homeschooling or the unschooling thing. There are times when I, sort of wish we had, but I think what we try to do is strike a balance between, okay, they're in the system, but we want to encourage them to run free a little bit and to be able to, explore some of those things that may be a little bit of a coloring outside the lines. And I have confidence in it. This again is probably just because of my own experience, my own background. I came out of, I was fortunate to go to college after early education, and then on into graduate school. And I came out of all of that with really a thoroughly liberal education grounded in literature, almost completely useless from the standpoint of, talking about employability. And yet, those very capabilities that I developed as a result of that education, I think have made it possible for me to do pretty much whatever I want to do in life because of the level of flexibility and agility that I have.
Yeah, that liberal arts argument really depends on some sense of agency and capacity, doesn't it?
It does, yes. I'm definitely a tremendous fan of the liberal arts. And I do believe that at least some portion of liberal arts really is right for pretty much everybody, to a degree, but some people are going to have more of a sense of what they can do with that than others are. And, I certainly understand that, but, to be able to really think, to really be able to examine ideas, to be able to work with ideas, it's just hard to beat a liberal education for that.
So the phrase lifelong learning is so often repeated, it almost kind of has this bubble around it of, do I really even know what that means? What does it mean for you?
Yeah, for me, for starters, I separate learning and education because I think a lot of times, and this is particularly true in my world, and I think it's probably true when people are talking from the perspective of K through 12 or education and looking out into the world. It's all about, from that perspective, continuing to take courses, continuing to take classes, continuing with sort of the formal trappings of education in one way or another. And, as you head into the adult world, that often means going to conferences and seminars and things that you do maybe as a member of an association or in a corporate training or something like that. And all of that's fine and valid. That can be important stuff in terms of gaining new skills and knowledge. But for me, learning is something much, much more expansive than that. Learning is really about engaging with the world, noticing what's going on around you, figuring out, what you don't know, where you might be wrong, what it's worth being curious about. And that extends into all facets of life. It's not just about acquiring new skills and new knowledge. We hear so much about, upskilling and reskilling right now. Like that is the sole substance of lifelong learning. And again, those are important, but I think it's those kind of higher level skills around being able to think critically, being able to figure out how you do tap into your creativity, how you do respond to what's, it feels like an increasingly complex and chaotic world, particularly here in the United States. And I think if you're going to deal with those things effectively and productively, you have to have a sense of what it means to be continually learning and be conscious and intentional about engaging in that. And that's more than just, going to a conference or a class occasionally.
So I know you don't work in the K-12 arena, but I have to imagine that people ask you for advice. We've got a lot of students and parents who feel a little bit lost right now. As you look at this situation, what advice would you give a high school student that would relate to becoming a lifelong learner?
I think so much of it comes out of first, being willing to step back and take a little time to just simply reflect, and to be a little bit more conscious about what you're doing each day and why. And I mean, this is essentially a sort of a form of mindfulness, I guess. It's mindfulness in the way that somebody like Ellen Langer might write about it. So, how do you get yourself into that sort of mindset, and then start thinking about, okay, if I'm going to be more intentional, if I'm going to be more conscious about learning, what are the opportunities around me for doing that? And whatever you're doing in school obviously is representative of that, or hopefully is representative of that. But particularly now, when you're not necessarily in the school environment, in most cases, you actually have a bit more freedom to start thinking, okay, let me look at the rest of the world that I live in here that, is now makes up my daily, educational surroundings. How do I engage with this differently? What might I do differently to help guide my own learning and not just rely on whatever the school is going to feed me? What am I interested in that I want to explore? And it may not turn out to be, your lifelong passion. I'm one of those people who, doesn't believe that you just sort of find your passion. You try a lot of things and you make the mistakes and you develop the knowledge and eventually, you find your way into the things that are most meaningful to you. But right now, as challenging as it is, in many ways, it's a great opportunity to start that process, to step back, reflect, become more mindful, find some of your own motivations, the things that really get you excited about learning things, and claiming some of that self-directedness that is just absolutely core to being an effective lifelong learner.
I've sometimes wondered if we get the passion equation wrong.
Mm,
It feels to me like I develop passions around things that I have developed competencies around and that I'm good at and I know make a difference,
hmm
rather than sometimes choosing the passion and building the skill set behind it. Has that been true for you at all?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's funny. I feel like personally, earlier in life, I spent a lot of time sort of chasing different passions, none of which I regret even remotely. For example, for a long time, I was a drummer in a band, and if it had worked out for me to go on and become a famous rock and roll drummer, that would have been excellent with me. But it did, it didn't work out, and the same thing applied to other situations in life. Um, and I do think it certainly took a while. I referenced writing earlier and how much that has played a role in my life. I mean, I never foresaw that. And I don't think, even back when Miss Powers had me so excited about writing, I would have described myself as a passionate writer, or that was something that I was going to pursue, as part of my life. And, I didn't publish my first actual book until I was 40 something, I think, so I probably would have never even called myself a writer up until that point. But over time, as I became more and more competent at that, it became more and more of what I was doing. I did sort of start to develop more and more of the passion in it. And I think that's, in line with what you're describing, Steve.
Yeah, I've wondered because sometimes I feel like it may put students in an awkward position
Mm,
to say, follow your passion,
yeah.
when at least for me, it feels like confidence came out of competence.
hmm
And so learning to do something well often preceded the sense of mastery and engagement,
Yeah. I
which
agree.
does bring us to engagement.
Mm,
So, what do you know about engagement that most people don't?
all right. Well, whether I know more than most people, I guess remains to be determined. But I know I get asked about it a lot, and before all of this hit, and we were having to do the home learning and switching so much to online. for the K through 12 world and for higher education. In my world of adult lifelong learning, online was already a big thing, and even outside of online learning, conference sessions, seminars that are presented by basically subject matter experts, people who know their topics well within a particular field or industry, but get up in front of a room and are, often dull as dirt and, relying completely on bad PowerPoint slides. So this whole issue of engagement has just been a big thing for quite a while in my world. So, I finally started thinking more about, okay, if we're going to talk about engagement, what do we mean, by this? I mean, there are different ways of being engaged, cognitively, emotionally, and starting to account for those more. But then beyond that, what really are the conditions for engagement? If we want things to be engaging, what has to be there for that to happen? Because, I'll often read things. I am on a lot of listservs, and I might, in fact, recently I saw an association executive director come on and say that, his expectation is that when somebody starts a webinar, it needs to be with a bang, and there better be something, there that's going to grab you and be exciting and get attention. And, I understand that impulse, but that isn't necessarily engagement. People can still walk away from that experience not having learned a thing. They may have been entertained, they may have enjoyed it, but they may not have learned anything. So, I think the three fundamental conditions for engagement, and I didn't come up with these. This is, just from doing the research, are meaning, safety, and what generally is characterized as availability. And if you've got those three conditions in place, more or less, even if you don't have fireworks going off and, the dog and pony show on the screen and everything else, chances are, you're going to get people engaged of any age and whatever it is that you're trying to teach.
So I think I understand the meaning part.
Mm-hmm.
What do you mean by safety?
Yeah, and maybe I can go through each of those with a little bit more detail. So safety is really the sense of the learner being able to participate, as their true self, without fear of, their self-image being damaged. In adult learning, their status or their career. You want to feel that that's not going to be there. Of course, these days, and I mean, this has always been there and always should have been more forefronted, but some of the biases that factor into learning environments, particularly around equity type issues. You want everybody showing up in an experience to feel like this is a place where I can be and I can be myself, and I don't have to kind of worry about how anybody's thinking about me or failing or anything else. It's a welcoming environment. So that's kind of the safety component. The availability component is there are different aspects to that, but it's being physically available. So actually being able to access the learning experience without any issues. And of course, when we're talking about technology, automatically some issues can come up with that. There's a whole realm of other issues around accessibility, though, extending into people with different types of disabilities, that sort of thing. But then there's also just the kind of emotional and psychological availability. Are you really open to learning? Are you ready to learn? Are you bringing that to the table as a learner? So how do we make sure that we're getting the right people in the right learning experiences and making those as accessible as possible for them, whatever those accessibility challenges might be. And then meaning, as you said, that one probably is the easiest to intuitively grasp. In the adult world, it's really that sense of relevance, that Malcolm Knowles was sort of the father of adult learning theory. Relevance was something that he really focused on. And I don't think it's confined to adults. I think it's equally, my 13-year-old brings this up all the time. I don't care about this stuff. It doesn't feel meaningful to my life. So if that's not there, it's going to be hard to get somebody engaged. But if those things are there, if the person can get themselves physically there, they're prepared for learning, they feel like it's a safe environment and it's relevant information that they're being given. Again, you don't have to have fireworks. You don't have to have the latest technology. you're going to have what's necessary for people to really be able to engage. And I think it applies across all ages.
I was struck as you were talking by the powerful role that parents play or adults play in making the connections with meaning. You know, of course, it doesn't seem relevant, but can I help you to understand how it is?
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's the helping to understand, and one thing we've tried to do more with our kids, and and honestly, we've always done it, so we probably should have been doing it as much before as we're doing it now. But it's really asking them about what they're experiencing online, not so much to sort of check in and make sure they're doing their work, but more to give them a chance to explain it to us, because we know that being able to elaborate on what you learned, being able to repeat it back and talk about it and connect it into your life, that's part of what makes it meaningful. And of course, it's a huge part of what's going to actually make the learning stick as well. And it's just such a simple thing to do that probably doesn't happen enough in households.
I'm trying to figure out how to articulate this, but one of the things I learned in my life was to ask non-judgmental questions. So not to say, was that a great experience, but to say, what was that experience like for you? Because kids and adults, they know what your expectations are for the response. So I'm curious about that. I'm also curious about the way in which algorithms and tech have simplified processes to such a degree that it makes it easier to get things done, but it almost feels like it removes the requirements for the person doing the work to think. Have you noticed that? And how would you explain that?
Oh boy, I'm so glad you brought that up. That's a topic kind of dear to my heart, because personalization right now is one of those just huge buzzwords across, I think, all sectors of education. And I think there's it can be very good because personalization can help to support meaning. It can potentially help with the availability side of things. But like you're saying, to truly learn almost always requires effort. There's certain types of unconscious learning that maybe we just absorb over a long period of time. But most things that we truly want to learn, they're going to take effort. They're going to take some failure. They're going to require some risk. There's going to be some pain involved to some degree or another. So if you start smoothing the path too much, I think it was I believe it was T.S. Eliot who had the quote around dreaming of systems so perfect that no one would have to be good. I feel like we're dreaming of systems so perfect that nobody's really going to have to try to learn. And of course, if you're not trying, you're not learning. So I think that's a real danger, and we need to be careful with the algorithms that we're leaving enough open in any algorithm for a human being to be a human being.
It's a fascinating question, isn't it? Right? Because some technologies are just they're here forever, right? So they're not going to go away. So is there a fair amount of conscious effort required? Like I find that I have to use a feed reader to manage my own information inflow so that I'm not just at the whim of someone else's flow of information. But that takes a lot of work.
It does. We're birds of a feather. I do the same thing, but kind of keeping that organized and figuring out what should be in it and what shouldn't, and it's challenging.
Okay, do you have any other sort of final thoughts? If parents and students and teachers whose lives have been turned upside down, you've been studying lifelong learning within the more adult culture, do you know anything that would be really helpful for others to know right now?
Well, I think because I work on the other side of the fence, I guess, or what I think about three sectors of education. There's K through 12 or pre-K through 12. There's higher education, and then where I work is what I characterize as the third sector. It's that other 50 to 60 years that people are going to have out there, and that those years are getting longer because we keep living longer, where you've got to navigate the world. So my main message right now, and it's just picking up on what I was saying earlier, is that outside of the strictures and the structures of normal schooling, you have the ability to potentially explore how to learn in different ways and in ways that are going to better serve you as you go out into the world and have to engage in that very active and productive and effective lifelong learning throughout your life. Because while I'm not saying schools are unnecessary, I think there's something to formal and structured schooling. They are not the best preparation for life as we live it right now. So take this opportunity, and it is also a challenge, I recognize, but embrace it as a way to potentially better prepare yourself for the world than might have otherwise happened.
Thank you, Jeff. That was terrific.
Thank you. That was fun.